Hello and welcome to a brand new long distance guided walk. Today I'm in the heart of the Fens, taking on a 50-mile long trail that starts in the city of Cambridge and ends at the wash at Kings Lynn, known as the Fen Rivers Way. The first day along the Fen Rivers Way begins at the train station in the famous city of Cambridge. The way crosses several parks to join the path along the side of the River Cam, which is kept closed for the remainder of the day. The path passes under the railway bridge and sticks to the towpath as it meanders its way north past Fen and under the busy A14. The way continues along the towpath past Horningsea and eventually onto Waterbeach, where you can stay overnight or catch the train back. Cambridge train station marks the very start of the Fen Rivers Way. As the route heads through the busy streets, there is a notable lack of waymarks, so it's important to keep an eye on the map. The way passes the Roman Catholic Church of Our Lady, built in 1890, and crosses large open parkland. Midsummer Common is crossed, which is cause for celebration, as this is the first encounter with the River Cam, which will keep me company for the next 13 miles or so. This fantastic building is Old Cheddar's Lane Pumping Station. Built in 1894 and standing at a height of 175 feet, the pumping station is now home to the Cambridge Museum of Technology. It is just past the chimney that the route enters Stourbridge Common, where you have a choice of either following the western or eastern side of the River Cam. I've opted for the western side, often regarded as the main route, with the eastern bank considered as an alternative. The towpath, which is followed to Waterbeach, actually forms part of the National Cycle Network, making this first stretch a rather busy route, although there are moments of complete silence, with just the sound of the birds in the trees and the ducks on the water. Just ahead on the opposite bank is a rather beautiful little house. This is Riverside Cottage, a Grade 2 listed building with origins dating back as far as the early 14th century. After passing under the A14, just across the water is a large house. This is Biggin Abbey Bishop's Palace, historically a summer residence of the bishops of Ely and dates back to the 13th century. Just beyond Biggin Abbey, the route arrives at Bates Bight Lock, which gives the walker the opportunity to change which side of the river they wish to walk along. The towpath along the Cam continues northwards, with just a mile or so left before I arrive at Waterbeach. As you progress further towards Waterbeach, a road bridge comes into view. This marks the crossing of the Cam at Clay Hythe, and the point where I turn away from the river briefly to arrive at Waterbeach train station and the end of the first day. Day 2 of the Fen Rivers Way begins at the village of Waterbeach and continues north along the river cam past Grazing Marsh to Bottisham Lock. The way sticks close to the river for the remainder of the journey to Ely, passing several stunning areas designed to attract and support local wildlife. The route passes on the opposite bank to Upware and heads north to cross the busy A1123. Just beyond is a defining landmark on the Fen Rivers Way as you reach the merging of the River Cam and the Great Ouse. There are several more miles of riverbank walking before the historical city of Ely is reached, with plenty of suitable overnight accommodation. Waterbeach, as with all other stops along the Fen Rivers Way, is well served by public transport thanks to the London to Kings Lynn line, with trains every hour in both directions. Today's route to the city of Ely begins by following the railway line briefly before turning away and heading straight back to the River Cam, which was followed for most of the first day. About 9 miles of the River Cam will be followed today, which works out as almost a quarter of the entire river's length, which provides fantastic opportunities to see some of its interesting wildlife. The first feature visited along the path is Bottisham Lock, which again gives the walker a chance to change which side they wish to walk along, with the eastern side remaining as an alternative route. Something of note should be the lack of facilities further ahead along the walk, with no opportunities for food or drink on the official route, whereas the alternative, there is a pub at Upware, which is perfectly placed for some riverside dining. It's along this stretch between Waterbeach and Upware that the Fen Rivers Way reaches some of its most remote locations. With its wide open fields and long riverbank walking, it's quite a few miles to the nearest town or village, which really adds to the sense of beauty and enjoyment of the walk. The first of several boatyards and moorings is passed on the opposite bank, showing how popular this stretch of river can be with boaters and tourists during the hotter summer months. Thankfully, I'm walking this during unseasonably warm weather in February, meaning the crowds of tourists have yet to arrive. It's not far past the moorings that the first of several wildlife-rich areas is reached. This flooded field sits directly next to the path and is home to many waders and waterfowl throughout the year. As I walked past the path I noticed widgeon, black-headed gulls and little egrets, so don't forget the binoculars. The ground round here feels flatter than ever as the route heads off the floodbank and joins the edge of the river for a mile or so, past a rather interesting sunken boat, and up onto the floodbank once more towards Upware. It's at this point another information board for the Fen Rivers Way is encountered, and with an interesting bit of geology mentioned. In the field to the south there is a line of lighter soil curving round to the left. According to the board, this was once the route of the River Cam many hundreds of years ago, causing a change in the soil colour. Just ahead is the village of Upware, but if you're sticking to the official route then there's no chance for a leisurely stop-off. but for those who have chosen the alternative eastern path, can enjoy all the village has to offer. Halfway between the village of Upware and the A1123 sits an isolated pillbox, which so far has been a rather rare sight along the path. This is a Type 24 pillbox dating back to World War II. After braving the traffic of the A1123, the route continues along the western bank of the River Cam to arrive at another spectacular wildlife conservation area. Here there is chance to see oystercatcher, snipe and the lovely redshank. It is also along this very bank that the surprise of Ely Cathedral comes into view, towering over the low-lying fens. So close, though still many miles to go until the Isle of Eels is reached, with one very important landmark yet to be seen. Just a mile further ahead is the end of the great river that I've been following since the start of the walk. It's here that the Cam merges with the Great Ouse, which will remain in company until the final steps into Kings Lynn over 30 miles further ahead. It's not a sad farewell, but more of an enticing one, with the cathedral luring you closer, inviting you to explore its history. A quick crossing of the railway marks the final mile into the city, following the riverbank path under the new A142 bypass and onto the historic Isle of Ely. The third day along the Fen Rivers Way begins in the city of Ely. A 1 mile detour has been added to take in the many highlights of this historic place before rejoining the way by the quay. It's here that the route follows the Great Ouse north along marshland and past a train depot at Queen Adelaide. After crossing to the western bank at the B1382, the route follows a straight path north-northwest all the way to the village of Littleport and the end of this short day's walk. It's a glorious morning once again here along the Fen Rivers Way, and I'm starting the third day at the historic city of Ely. I'm going to head off route to follow a 1 mile detour into the city centre to explore its rich history and spectacular cathedral.
The first historic feature along the route into the city centre are the earthworks of Ely's Norman Castle. The Motte and Bailey Castle dates back to 1070 and built by William the Conqueror to maintain control of what was once an island surrounded by wet marshland. As you pass the castle hill, just on the left there is a Grade 1 listed barn and storehouse of the ancient monastery dating back to 1575. Sitting next to this is the spectacular Ely Porter, a beautiful Grade 1 listed entrance to the monastery dating back to 1397. The gate is flanked by 4 square, castellated corner turrets dressed in stone. After passing under the gate and turning right, the route heads along the monastic precinct with breathtaking views up to this spectacular Holy Trinity Cathedral, of which construction was started in 1083. Opposite the cathedral is the Bishop's Palace. Dating to the 15th century and given a Grade 1 listing, the palace was once the residence of the Bishops of Ely up until 1941. As you make your way down the busy high street, there are several opportunities to restock the lunchbox and pick up a snack or a meal. But it's time for me to head back to the riverbank path and continue my journey north. The path along here is exceptionally easy to follow, with a hard track constructed through the park marking the way ahead. Being so close to the city centre makes this section one of the busiest along the whole route, with dog walkers and tourists walking along the Grey 2's riverbank path. Areas around here are designated local nature reserves, with numerous rare birds and insects to be seen, including kingfishers, and you may even see a snipe in the marshes. There's a brief moment of noise as you pass a factory before leading you back into the peaceful lakes and rivers nestled amongst dense reed beds and woodland. The way crosses the Grey 2's via a rather ugly metal footbridge and continues north along the roadside for roughly 3/4 of a mile. Eventually arriving at the road bridge, and after crossing to the western bank once more, the route finally keeps away from the busy traffic along the road. It's at Queen Adelaide that the way joins the riverbank footpath north in almost a dead straight line, with road, river, railway and footpath all running in parallel with the same goal in sight, the large village of Littleport. Although a long straight path may sound boring, being so close to the river means that wildlife spotting takes priority, with the likelihood of seeing great crested grebes, mute swans, grey herons, and even a range of ducks including goldeneye. It's a blissfully warm February day as I stride out along the beautiful riverbank path. The railway alongside doesn't seem to interfere with the tranquillity of the riverbank walking, with trains only running every hour, the disturbance is only seconds before peace is restored. With just over 2 miles left of riverbank walking, there's a notable feature up ahead. A flyover bridge marks the location the River Lark merges with the Great Ouse. The river originates 31 kilometres away at the small village of Wepstead and Bradfield Combust and passes through Bury St Edmunds and the rugged Breckland landscape. As you approach Littleport via Sand Hill, there's an opportunity to grab something to eat or drink at the Swan by the river before the path continues along the Great Ouse. An additional half a mile will bring you out at the road next to Littleport train station and the end of this short but interesting day's walking. Day 4 along the Fen Rivers Way begins in the large village of Littleport and follows the eastern bank of the Great Ouse River for around 3.5 miles, and considered the worst part of the entire route thanks to the close proximity to the road and poor maintenance of the path through the summer months. Upon reaching Brandon Creek, the way crosses into the neighbouring county of Norfolk and finally moves away from the busy A10. Several miles of riverbank walking leads to 10 Mile Bank, which marks the approach to Denver Sluice. The sluice is the meeting point of several rivers which extend over the Fens and is also the location of the Fen Causeway. From here, the final riverbank is joined, leading to the Norfolk town of Downham Market. Leaving the large village of Littleport behind, Day 4 starts by following a short section of road to the A10 to pick up the eastern bank of the Great Ouse River. The eastern bank along the A10 is considered the least interesting part of the walk due to the noisy traffic rumbling alongside, and the bank tends to be overgrown during the summer months. Although not official, an alternative path is available on the opposite bank, which tends to be better looked after, but this also runs parallel to a road, albeit a minor one, and far less noisy than the A10. There's a brief bit of respite from the traffic noise as the path skirts around a small picnic area just south of Brandon Creek. It's worthy of note that even though the OS map shows toilets and a phone box, neither are present any longer. Reaching Brandon Creek is a real milestone along the journey, as it marks the crossing of Cambridgeshire into the neighbouring county of Norfolk. It is also here that the route passes the shipping, offering the perfect setting for a spot of lunch. After entering Norfolk, the path finally heads away from the A10 and enjoys a 2-mile section through vast open countryside to 10 Mile Bank. For me, the wind has really picked up, and with few buildings and trees around, it's a very exposed landscape to walk in. The road bridge marks the arrival at 10 Mile Bank and is also the point where I cross over the Grey Twos again to pick up the path along the western bank once more. If you've decided to take the alternative western bank from Littleport to avoid the overgrown section to Brandon Creek, then this is where you would pop out after several miles of riverbank and road walking. Shortly after passing under the railway, the route passes close to the mouth of the River Wissey. The river stretches for almost 50 kilometres, with the lower 18 kilometres being navigable by pleasure craft. Just before arriving at Denver Sluice, it's worth noting that the path heads over the route of the Fen Causeway. This ancient Roman road dates back to the 1st century AD and connected the Roman town of Peterborough to East Anglia. It is also thought that the road was raised up above marshy ground using gravel with a width of up to 60 feet. Ahead is Denver Sluice, where numerous rivers and waterways converge. The purpose of the sluice is to manage the river navigation, water abstraction, agriculture, land drainage and local fisheries. The path beyond Denver Sluice is a simple one, meandering along the Grey Twos with a significant change in the water of the river. It certainly looks a lot more like seawater, with a build-up of silts and salt marsh. There's only about a mile or so left to go until the Norfolk town of Downham market is reached, and the end of this penultimate day's walking. Tomorrow sees me continue north along the Grey Twos to reach the historic town of Kings Lynn and the end of this Fenland adventure. The fifth and final day along the Fen Rivers Way begins in the Norfolk town of Downham Market and immediately joins the path between the Relief Channel and the Grey Twos River. The path heads north to cross the road at Stowe Bridge and continues past traces of the old railway line which once ran into Wisbech. The route continues north past a ruined church at Wiggenhall St Peter and to the neighbouring village of Wiggenhall St Germans. It's a bit of a shock to the system as you arrive at Kings Lynn via a power station and industrial estate, but this is quickly passed to eventually arrive at the historic quay, with a short walk to the train station via Kings Lynn Historic Town Centre. Within minutes of leaving Downham Market, the Fen Rivers Way is once again reunited with the Grey Twos River, which will remain in company for the remainder of my journey to Kings Lynn. Unlike previous days walking, today the path is flanked by wide rivers on both sides, and will continue like this for some 7 miles. The path is obvious as I stick close to the Great Ouse, and an absolute joy to walk as the surrounding marshes and waterways are alive with all manner of wildlife. As you stride out along the riverbank, keep a keen eye on the rippling waters as oyster catchers, redshank and numerous species of ducks and gulls can be seen along this stretch. Up ahead is the first interruption along the route, with a double bridge crossing at Stowe Bridge. There is a chance to grab some afternoon lunch from the Heron Free House, just between both bridges, if you set off later in the day. Crossing the road at Stowe Bridge is a relatively safe venture, unlike some of the busier roads earlier along the route, and leads you north into the vast open marshland, with the river keeping close company. It's about 3 miles until the next encounter with civilization at the little village of Wiggenhall St Mary Magdalene. Just as you approach Wiggenhall St Mary Magdalene, there are hints of the old railway that once ran from nearby Watlington to the town of Waterbeach, some 8 miles to the west. The line was opened on the 1st of February 1848 and ran for 120 years, finally closing on the 9th of September 1968. It is thought that the metal rail bridge over the relief channel dates to around 1950. After passing Wiggenhall St Mary Magdalene, the path enters the tiny hamlet of Wiggenhall St Peter. The spectacular ruined church of St Peter sits directly next to the flood bank and dates back to the 15th century. Strangely, the church has only recently left to ruin, as there are photographs from the 1920s showing the church largely intact. The way continues along the riverbank to the nearby village of Wiggenhall St Germans and directly passes the beautiful historic church. St Germans, also known as St Germanus or St Germain, is unique, being the only church dedicated to this saint in Norfolk. The church hints at its Norman origin, with the tower being the earliest remaining part dating to the 13th century. The Crown and Anchor pub sits directly alongside the church and is perfectly located to stop for some riverside lunch before continuing the final push to Kings Lynn. The remaining few miles takes you past arable fields, aiming for the tall white power station that's been sitting on the horizon for the last few hours of walking. It's a bit of a shock to the system, going from broad open countryside to stark industrial estate within the space of a few minutes, but once you're on the other side of the roaring A47, the historic delights of Kings Lynn lay just ahead. As I approach the quay, I'm sadly greeted by signs of neglect, with rubbish strewn out over the adjacent marsh. Thankfully, this is quickly passed and the quay is finally reached, and the end of the Fen Rivers Way. Officially, the route finishes opposite the Marriott's warehouse, which dates back to the 16th century and overlooks the vast harbour that once even had its own harbour railway. I've decided to continue a little further to take in more of the historical highlights of Kings Lynn and end at the train station just a mile away. The first of these historical treats is the spectacular Guildhall and Town Hall, with parts of it dating back to 1422. Close by is the breathtaking Kings Lynn Minster, a Benedictine priory founded in 1095 and now the parish church. The minster was rebuilt in the 13th century, with its twin west towers dating from the 15th century, and an absolute must-see for all visitors to the town. A short walk from the minster is Greyfriars, with the best surviving example of a mendicant tower and passageway in the country. The remains date to the 13th century, and within the Greyfriar Gardens there is also a late Saxon stone cross. The historic treats don't end there, with the late 13th century North Gwannock Gate being passed on the way to the Chapel of Our Lady. Red Mount, formerly known as the Chapel of Our Lady of the Mount, dates back to the 15th century and formed part of the pilgrimage route leading on to Walsingham Abbey in North Norfolk. The path along the chapel leads round to the train station and the end of a good low-level fenland walk. There's plenty to see along the way, including lots of wildlife and the odd little historic treat, but ending by the quay fails to do Kings Lynn any justice, and taking in the history of the town really adds another dimension to an otherwise fairly bland trail in terms of landscapes. It certainly is a route recommended for those who enjoy flat walking, with lots of wildlife to see and big skies to enjoy.